When I wrote my first book last year, I called it Platform Scale because I was fascinated by this specific aspect about platforms. The fact that platforms can scale in a model that was not possible with traditional businesses because you did not have the same kind of feedback loops in traditional business. Even if you had feedback loops on the supply side of the traditional business, they were not internalized and they did not scale in the same way. But platforms scale in a very new kind of fashion. That's why I named my first book Platform Scale, because I was so obsessed with it. But as I moved on from that book, I realized that there were many more aspects to the idea of platform business models that were transforming entire elements of the economy. And that's why when I wrote my second book, I called it Platform Revolution, which is that there's a fundamental and transformative shift that's happening in the nature of the market because of the way platform businesses work. There are several things that are happening in how market structures today are changing. The first is that a lot of traditional markets have had gatekeepers, and these gatekeepers have been very slow and unscalable. If you ever tried publishing a book through a publisher, through a traditional publisher, you realize how unscalable a traditional gatekeeper is. Today what we're seeing is, we're seeing a whole new kind of gatekeeper coming in who's much more scalable and is hopefully much fairer. It's not always the case that the new gatekeepers are much fairer than the older ones, and I'll visit that shortly. But what's important is that in today's world, we're seeing these new forms of gatekeepers, these platforms, coming in, intermediating markets, but doing so in a very scalable fashion. If you think of how publishing used to work in the past, you had to know somebody in the publishing industry. You had to have a way in to get discovered by the market, because it was very difficult for this central gatekeeper to scale itself and to look at a lot of submissions in a scalable fashion. And what Amazon does to some extent is by creating an open Kindle publishing platform, it allows the market to help your book be discovered by anybody out there. And so in that way, Amazon has ended up creating a much more scalable form of gatekeeping for the publishing industry. The second thing that platforms do in terms of how they impact markets is that they unlock spare capacity. The concept of spare capacity is very interesting because fundamentally, traditionally in the industrial model, whenever a flow of business was restructured, people always thought that there was no new value creation. It was just a restructuring of value. Somebody else was coming into the business and taking away some value, and it was a zero-sum game where value was being redistributed. But what we see today is that a lot of spare capacity is being unlocked. Nobody in the past thought that the empty room at home could be used as a B&B. Nobody thought that the time that you were spending watching television could instead be used creating video and putting it up on YouTube. So essentially, a whole lot of spare capacity has been unlocked, and that was possible because what platforms do is they allow equal access to the market to anybody out there. And I would use that term equal with quotes around it, because there are some new mechanisms by which determine what factors will determine your access to the market. But what platforms do is that they allow these mechanisms to permeate through to market participants in a much more democratized fashion, which was not possible in the traditional model of business, where if you had to get access to a market, you need to have the right business relationships and the right business connect. A third thing that platforms do that we understand very well is the idea of aggregation. They take highly fragmented markets and aggregate them. We don't see that happening so much with some of the bigger platforms that we see around us, but think of a platform like Redbus in India. Redbus is a platform that came in and took a highly fragmented bus industry in India, which was run by private players who were not digitized in the past, digitized them for the first time, aggregated them onto one platform, and created amazing efficiencies in a market for the first time. So platforms take completely fragmented markets and aggregate them in entirely new ways as well. This also happened in the US with a platform called OpenTable that aggregated the entire restaurant industry in the US onto one single platform in a very similar fashion. In addition to aggregating, another thing that platforms do is that having aggregated everything together, they also enable market participants to take an informed decision about who they should transact with. And that is where platforms bring in transparency. What platforms do is they help the producers and the consumers understand each other much better. In the past, markets were extremely opaque. And so one of the key decision factors that resulted in market interactions was the price of a commodity. This worked really well for commodity markets, but it did not work well for markets where the services or the products were highly specialized. What platforms do is that they make all of these market decisions dependent on many more variables that they open out to the various participants in the market. A good example of that is what TripAdvisor did to the hotel industry. In the past, it would be easy to stay with the Marriott or the Hilton. It would be very difficult to stay with, to take a decision about staying at a B&B that you did not know anything about. But today, TripAdvisor creates that transparency that helps you determine whether you should be staying at a certain place, and depending on how well it is rated, you can determine what kind of price you're willing to pay for that place. And that's what a platform like TripAdvisor does. It does not necessarily aggregate the market, it does not unlock spare capacity, but it creates transparency in a way that allows everyone to take better decisions. And a final way in which platforms impact markets, and a very compelling way in which platforms impact markets, is that platforms create intelligence that make not just the market more efficient, but they also create intelligence that teaches the market participants how to participate in the market even better. If you've used any of these platforms, and if you've at any point in time received a notification or an email about a certain set of steps that you could do to increase your visibility on the platform, that's a way of the platform communicating intelligence back to the market. And in the same way, platforms become more intelligent as they are used, and that allows them to connect users in the future much better. Think of the Facebook news feed. The Facebook news feed encapsulates the intelligence that Facebook has as a platform. It knows who you are as a user, and it knows all the information about the content that is available from your network and how that content has been used by other users. Using all of this information, it determines what is the best content to be shown to you. And that is one way where Facebook, the Facebook newsfeed, is using intelligence to show you content in a way that a traditional media company never did in the past. And so these are specific ways, by creating scalable gatekeeping, by unlocking spare capacity, by enabling aggregation, by creating transparency in the market, and by using a new kind of intelligence, that platforms impact market structures considerably in this age when platforms are coming in and intermediating markets entirely.